In this episode, I speak with Dr. Sailesh Rao. Key points addressed were Dr. Rao's extensive research regarding climate change and climate healing as they relate to animal agriculture and the future of the vegan world. We also discussed Dr. Rao's nonprofit called Climate Healers and its key initiative called Vegan World 2026, in which a vegan world can be brought to light by engaging a concept of a new game or way of living and thinking called Aquarius. Dr. Rao explains how Aquarius will endeavor to allow everyone to stay ecologically responsible and aware using the app that Climate Healers is developing. We wrap up with the chat with Dr. Rao explaining some core aspects of the white paper he authored in response to vegans' desire for a document with scientific data supporting the aspects that animal agriculture has in regards to climate change and the subsequent deterioration of the earth. Stay tuned for my riveting talk with Dr. Sailesh Rao. Hi, I'm Patricia, and this is Investigating Vegan Life with Patricia Kathleen. This series features interviews and conversations I conduct with experts from food and fashion to tech and agriculture, from medicine and science to health and humanitarian arenas. Our inquiry is an effort to examine the variety of industries and lifestyle tenets in the world of vegan life. To that end, we will cover topics that have revealed themselves as common and integral when exploring veganism. The dialogue captured here is part of our ongoing effort to host transparent and honest rhetoric for those of you who, like myself, find great value in hearing the expertise and opinions of individuals who have dedicated their work and lives to their ideals. You can find information about myself and my podcast at patriciakathleen.com. Welcome to Investigating Vegan Life. Now let's start the conversation. Hi everyone and welcome back. I am your host Patricia, and today I am elated to be sitting down with Dr. Sailesh Rao. Dr. Rao is an author and executive director of Climate Healers. You can find out more on his website on www.climatehealers.org. Welcome, Dr. Rao.
Thank you for having me, Patricia.
Absolutely. I look forward to unpacking. For those of you who are new to the podcast, I will proffer a quick bio on Dr. Rao. But before I do that, let me give you a roadmap in which today's line of inquiry will follow. I'll first ask Dr. Rao to further unpack his bio that we read in regards to launching Climate Healers after his previous work with Al Gore. Then I'll look straight at unpacking Climate Healers, which is a website and an endeavor. It's a campaign. It's a lot of things kind of packed into one. I'll look at the core components of it in regards to the impetus for why it was started, how it's based, what the areas of education and change are in regards to the concepts of the new game, and versus the old game, and a lot of Dr. Rao's core philosophies that kind of fuel and generate all of his work. I'll then looking at some of the outplay factors from his work, namely ecological, economic, political, social, and spiritual, that he kind of outlines beautifully on his website. And then we'll turn to looking at what is called the white paper. For those of you who are familiar with it, and for those of you who are not, I'll look at having Dr. Rao kind of unpack the core constituents of it, as well as why it was developed and all of those things. So we're going to cover a lot of information today, and Dr. Rao and I have covered that we are my endeavors, while they sound brief as my description, they will be actually quite labor intensive. So we're going to move right through this. As promised, a quick bio. Dr. Sailesh Rao has over 3 decades of professional experience and is the founder and executive director of Climate Healers, a nonprofit dedicated towards healing the Earth's climate. A systems specialist with a PhD in electrical engineering from Stanford University, Dr. Rao worked on the internet communications infrastructure for 20 years after graduation. During this period, he led the transformation of early analog internet connections to more robust digital connections that also ran 10 times faster at the 1 gigabyte per second. In 2006, he switched careers and became deeply immersed full-time in solving the environmental crisis affecting humanity. Dr. Rao is the author of 2 books, the first, Carbon Dharma, The Occupation of the Butterflies, and Carbon Yoga, The Vegan Metamorphosis. And he's also an executive producer of 4 documentaries: The Human Experiment in 2013, Cowspiracy, The Sustainability Secret in 2014, What the Health in 2017, and A Prayer for Compassion in 2019. So, Dr. Rao, I want to drop straight into what had you launching Climate Healers, and then we can kind of unpack other things as they come about throughout that. But you had this switch over from working as a systems engineer, and then but you didn't immediately launch Climate Healers, right? You started working for the Al Gore campaign.
That's correct. Yeah. So even the switch happened because I happened to see Al Gore's presentation on TV, and I was so shocked. I said to my wife, if half of what he's saying is true, I feel like I'm wasting my time working on making the internet 10 times faster. Right. So I was working on 10 gigabit Ethernet at that time in 2005. So she said to me, if you think it's that important, why don't you pursue it? So I wrote to Mr. Gore, and I didn't hear from him for 6 months. And I wrote to him saying, how can I help you? Because I think it's that important. And so, but I got a letter from him 6 months later saying, would you like to get trained by me to give my presentation? So I was part of the second batch of people that he trained. So he's trained a lot of batches now, people to give his presentation. But during the training, I asked him a question about animal agriculture, and he didn't want to answer it. So I realized that there was something that they didn't want to talk about, which is lifestyle issues. And he actually makes it pretty clear. He said, his objective is to um, save civilization as we know it. And civilization as we know it is full of this consumerism, right? So it's about saving consumerism and the civilization as we know it. So I don't blame him for that. That's what he was thinking of doing. That's what he's trying to do. But then I realized that it's not going to solve the problem unless you address it holistically, because I'm a system specialist. And I know that that system is going to go down the tubes. Consumerism has an end. So I started Climate Healers in 2007, basically to heal the climate, as opposed to maintain it in a high state of disrepair, which is where Al Gore and his team are going, maintaining it, right? So it's like if you have a fever and you have all these ailments and you go to a doctor, and the doctor examines you and says, oh yeah, you have a 1 degree Celsius fever. I'll make sure it doesn't go over 2 degrees Celsius. Wouldn't you say that this doctor is incompetent? That he's not really addressing your problem? But that's the way we are dealing with the earth. And I felt that was fundamentally wrong. So I started Climate Healers to reverse climate change, to look at the underlying root cause and address it.
Your granddaughter, you're part of the folklore based around you is that the 2026, the number, and we should probably get into Vegan World 2026 and how quickly that came about after you developed Climate Healers. But
Right.
you have a story based on her. Can you kind of tell us about that?
Yeah, I started Climate Healers in 2007, and I would say within a couple of years, I was really depressed. I thought there's nothing I can do about this. It is so big
Yeah.
and so vast, and it's so endemic. What can one person do? So I was pretty depressed, and then I went to this sanctuary that you see the picture of that in the back, in my background. So this sanctuary, I went to this sanctuary in 2009, and I had this sense of perfection. That nature was perfect, exactly as she is, right? So because this sanctuary used to be a coffee plantation like 20 years ago. And by 2009, it had become this place where at night I could not even hear my sister talk because there was such a loud din of insects and frogs. Life was so full in this sanctuary. And so I went to the owners of this sanctuary and I asked them, how did you make this happen? Because this was a couple from New Jersey who had gone to India and made this happen. And so Pamela told me, well, we didn't have to do much. We just have to tear down the fences and give the land back to the animals. And they did everything. I
Hmm.
said, wow, that's all you have to do? How easy is that, right? And she said, no, well, we also had to patrol the land and make sure that no human being comes inside. And at that point, I felt really small. I felt as if I don't even belong in my own home because I was born in this forest, just 200 miles away from where I was standing. And so I felt depressed. I felt like I don't belong in my own home. And so I went back home and I was so down. Um, and then our son and his girlfriend, girlfriend at that time, they announced that they're going to have a baby. Right. And so, and our granddaughter was born a year later, I mean, 9 months later, I guess, in 2010, November. And I went to see her when she was a month old, and I held her in my arms for the first time, and she looked up at me and she smiled. And with that smile, she convinced me that we belong exactly as we are and that we are not telling the right story, right? Because to me, my granddaughter is half Indian, one quarter African American, and one quarter American Indian. She has three continents in her. And I saw all of humanity looking up at me and saying, "What do you mean I don't belong? What are you thinking? I belong exactly as I am." So I decided to go and study climate science and try to find a story in which we belong exactly as we are. And as
Mm.
part of that belonging, we are going to transform. So I went back and wrote my first book, Carbon Dharma, and it just poured out of me because Dharma is what is the right thing to do. And it's very easy to figure that out. You learn that in kindergarten. Be kind to all life, be kind to each other, and the planet will be fine and we'll be fine. This is not complicated, right? But we do things mindlessly. We do things, we just buy these things and we don't even understand what happened to make that product show up at your doorstep, right? And there was a lot of oppression, a lot of domination and violence that happened to make that product that we don't see directly. And that disconnect is what makes us participate in this process. So I wrote about that in Carbon Dharma and how we have to transform from being a caterpillar to a butterfly, right? So uh, because my granddaughter gave me that, I mean, she basically turned my head around 180 degrees and made me look at things from a different perspective. I literally consider her as someone who brought me to faith, who
Mm.
changed my life. And so I promised her that I'll never ever lie to her. Okay. So, um, and then I've been following what is happening with the biodiversity on the planet and how fast biodiversity is being killed off. And there is a Living Planet report that the World Wildlife Fund puts out every 2 years. And in 2014, they reported that between 1970 and 2010, 52% of all wild vertebrates disappeared. Meaning, in terms of their total weight, they are down by 52% from what they were in 1970. And I did my calculations. I said, if it's 52% in 40 years, how many more years do we need to wipe them out? And I made my calculation assuming that we are killing wildlife at a rate proportional to our economy.
Mm.
So our economy has been going up exponentially, and so the wild animal killing is also going up exponentially. So that's how I did my calculation. And I came up with the number 2026, that we are on track to wipe them all out by 2026. And I was shocked. I mean, I was saying, why isn't everybody talking about this? It's so quick, right? I mean, in 12 years, from 2014 to 2026, we are on track to wipe them all out. So I looked up the literature. At first, I blurted out to my granddaughter, I made this calculation and I want to promise you that there'll be more wild animals when you're 16 years old than when you were born in 2010. Okay, I made that promise to her publicly. And then I thought, what if I'm wrong? I'm doing a simple calculation based on exponential functions.
Mm.
So what if I'm wrong? So I started looking into the literature and I contacted some of the researchers who've been working in this field. And I realized that they were using a model that's based on the predator prey. It's like a tiger versus deer population. So they assume that humans versus nature is just like tiger versus deer. Humans are the predators of nature, And once nature has been devoured enough, we'll die. Right? So this is the calculation. We will die off, and then nature will flourish again, and then we'll come back again. So it's like this cyclical function that happens. That's the way they were modeling it. So I wrote to the modelers and I said, you know, don't you think that human beings have technology and using that we wipe out the last bit of nature, before we die off? And because it's not like a tiger, right? So tiger has no choice. If it cannot eat a deer, the tiger dies. Whereas we will find the last remaining deer and kill it off.
Right.
So, and I realized that they hadn't taken that into account. They hadn't taken technology into account.
Hmm.
And so I was even more convinced that my calculations were correct. So then I waited for the next report. The next report came out in 2016 because they issue reports every 2 years, the Living Planet report. And it's a fairly comprehensive survey they do of over 5,000 odd vertebrate species. And they said that between 1970 and 2012, 58% of all wild vertebrates disappeared. So from 52 it went to 58 in just 2 years. I said, well, at that rate, just a linear extrapolation, it's 100% by 2026. So I had made that calculation um, just a couple of days before I was reading a story to my granddaughter in bed. And she was in kindergarten at that time, right? And she was, uh, I mean, she was, it was my job to put her to bed every day when she was with us. And so I was reading her a story. In fact, I was reading her Ruby Roth's book. Uh, That's why we don't eat animals. This is a book that Ruby Roth had signed over for Kimaya. So at the end of the story, she asked me, "So, Grandpa, who were the first human beings?" And remember, I had promised her that I'll never ever lie to her. So I said, "Okay, I'm going to explain to you how evolution works." And I said, "Imagine that you're standing on the street and you're holding your mother by your hand, and you ask your mother to bring her mother to stand by her side, and so on. So we create a long line of mothers on this side of the street. And on the other side of the street, you ask a chimpanzee to do the same thing with her mother and her grandmother, and so on. By the time these two lines go from Phoenix to Tucson, they would merge because both lines are going to say, hey, that's my mother too. I mean, immediately she sat up in bed and I could see that she was stunned, you know. She said, what? Are you telling me that animals are my family?
Yep.
And I said, well, now that you put it that way, they are your family. To be honest, I hadn't put it that way in my mind. Okay. So I only knew of the theory of evolution, right? So she said, I mean, why are people eating my family? She started bawling. She said, make them stop, Grandpa. They're eating my family. So I realized I had created a world full of monsters for my granddaughter, with this story.
Hmm.
So I was trying to console her and I said, Kimaya, I'm trying, we are all going to do it. Okay. I'm trying. In fact, it's my job to make them stop. She said, she looked at me, and I could see she stopped crying. She was wide eyed. She looked at me and she said, this is your job. This is your job. You haven't done your job. So when will you do your job? And I
Hmm.
said, I better get it done by 2026. Otherwise, we're all in big trouble. Okay.
Yeah.
So she said, will you promise me that? I said, okay, I'll promise you that. She said, will you give me a pinky promise? I said, sure, I'll give you a pinky promise. And I didn't even know what pinky promise meant. Okay.
Hmm.
And she told me after I gave her a pinky promise, you can never, ever break a pinky promise. And then she went to sleep. And I couldn't sleep because I was like, what did I promise my granddaughter? Who am I to do this? Who am I to make such a promise? And But so I couldn't sleep. But finally, I dozed off, and in the morning, I woke up with the realization that it is my job to do this because it is an engineering job. It is an engineering project, really. How do you get food to people? How do you get nourishing food to people? And and then convince them to eat it, right? So so anyway, that's when I started the Vegan World 2026 project.
And this is kind of you've dropped us straight into what I'm most enamored with, and I think that we've had a lot of people reach out and speak to us through this podcast and others. But I have an affinity for action items, or the what can I do moment, because it's the only thing that really helps me with this despair that it sounds like you've experienced in your career as well, when you come into some of these horrifying figures. And you've done exactly that. And so your pedagogical lenses, I think, are so interesting because you break everything down into systems, and this kind of like, how do we all contribute in the most meaningful way, and is part of the new game, and things like that. It's
Mhm.
broken down. You have to break everything down into these systems, and you have this vegan lifestyle in conjunction with ecosystems, and that conversation that has to take place. And all of it kind of plays out into, as I said, your pedagogical lenses. And I want to drop straight into a couple of the phrases that you use when you talk about these things. You talk about being climate healers and thermostat species. And I'm hoping you can
Right.
kind of define those two things from the outset, before we climb into like four aspects of a vegan world and things of that nature. So, what do you mean by saying climate healers and thermostat species?
So I talk about healing as, human earth animal liberation. That's the foundation of healing. And it's also, doing things for your health, for the environment, for the animals, and for love. And so that's why we do things that we do, right? So um, we see the oppression. We see oppression of people. You see oppression of animals, and you see people getting sick with the bad food that's being served to them. And we see a system that's literally lying to us, right? I mean, from our childhood onwards, we are lied to. We are told you have to eat meat to get protein, you have to drink milk to get calcium. These are all outright lies, and everybody knows it. I mean, the people who are lying know it too. So, which is the sad part. And I feel that a society that lies to its children deserves to disintegrate. It needs to start over on a foundation of truth. Because you look at, why are we lying to people like that? We are convincing them to eat these foods that will make them sick, that will make them chronic customers for the pharmaceutical industry. Because our entire system is built on growth, economic growth. you know I mean, we have these 17 UN SDGs, and there is this economic growth SDG, which is like a Trojan horse that's put in there. That's SDG number 8. And every government basically says, oh, to solve all the SDGs, all you have to do is focus on number 8, right? Just grow the economy and everything will be solved. And what do we do in the process? We have lots of hospitals, lots of prisons, lots of military infrastructure. I mean, it's all about violence and growing the violence that we're doing to each other and to the earth. So it's about changing that story and changing that game that we are playing, and and making the new game and the new story on a foundation of truth. So that's what climate healers is all about. And we kind of have certified climate healers who come and they understand the story that we're trying to tell, the new game that we're trying to create, and look at all aspects of this transformation, and they sign on and saying, yes, I want to be that. And then they become certified climate healers, and they go and educate others, just like Al Gore is doing with his climate reality project. We have something similar.
Mhm.
And yeah, the whole idea behind the thermostat species is the research that I did after my granddaughter looked at me and smiled was to understand, what the heck were we doing all along?
Mhm.
Because in nature, everything that every species does actually has a beneficial impact on the ecosystem. I mean, you may look at an elephant that's breaking branches of trees and you think the elephant is being destructive. But when you look closer, you'll notice that wherever the elephant broke branches of trees, that's where the sunlight streams and nourishes the underbrush. So it had a function, right? And wherever the elephant trampled on bushes in the forest, that's where new pathways are formed for all the other animals. So even though it was destructive, it was actually constructive. So nature is one of the most perfect system designs on the planet. I mean, that I've ever seen. And so I said, there must be something that we have been doing all along that we are not aware of. And I found it in the climate science literature and in the early Anthropocene hypothesis of Bill Rudiman. He wrote books about it, and he's had this hypothesis for like 15, 20 years now. And his hypothesis was that humans have been altering the climate for 10,000 years, not just 200 years.
Mm.
Okay. And what he showed was if human beings had not deforested and cut down and started doing agriculture, the earth would have gone back to another ice age 5,000 years ago. Because that was the cycle we were on. We were on this ice age and interglacial period, the warm period between ice ages. That's the kind of cycle we are on.
Mhm.
And what we did accidentally is that we kept the temperature constant for 10,000 years, okay, by just doing deforestation. And then over the last 200 years, we found fossil fuels, and by burning them, we've increased the temperature by another 1 degree Celsius. And in the process, we have created all the tools and technologies to understand what we did, right?
Mhm.
Because without our technology, we wouldn't know that we had been in 100 ice ages and we've had all these warm periods. We wouldn't have known any of that. So to understand what we did and now become a conscious climate regulator species or a thermostat species of the planet, because that's our job. Our job is to prevent the earth from ever going back to another ice age so that all the animals can thrive. So we are really here to serve nature, not to extract from nature. So we kind of, we went through this extraction phase where we
Mhm.
accidentally heated up the planet unknowingly. This is the beauty of nature. Does the elephant know that the elephant she's creating openings for the sunlight to stream and nourish the underbrush? No, she has no clue. She's just breaking branches of trees and eating the leaves and throwing the branch away, right? Just like that, we had no clue about what we were doing. But there is a story in which we belong exactly as we are. And so that is the gift that my granddaughter gave me, to go
Yeah,
look for that story.
you've spoken about that and with clarity. I like the idea that you talked in one of your previous talks about not trying to fix a system that was broken and sick, but developing
Right.
an entirely new one and starting from that. And I think that there's a lot of clarity that comes out because things get strangulated into these weird points when one's trying to become eco-conscious or environmentally friendly, and it's the exact opposite, and then there's just
Right.
this sadness that ensues with all effort kind of ending in this opposite. I'm wondering, you talk about, for the vegan world, you talk about four aspects. You talk about a vegan constitution, vegan institutions, vegan infrastructure, and vegan currency. And these
Right.
are kind of these four pillars that will set up being like enabling the aftermath that will happen with a vegan future, which is this rebirth, regrowth. Um, can you clarify what you mean by a vegan constitution? Is it a social contract? Is it a written one? And this is kind of bringing in the old versus the new. So the
Right.
going from Homo sapien to Homo ahimsa and things of that nature. But can you kind of explain what you mean by some of these terms with like vegan constitution, institution, infrastructure, and currency?
Right. So I talk about vegan constitution as a foundation that we all agree on and start building upon. Right. And the constitution is it's literally it's like a recording of our intent and who we are and what we want to become, right, and in the new vegan world. And so a vegan world is a world of non-violence. So it's normal non-violence. So currently we are in a system of normalized violence. And this again, my granddaughter sort of pointed it out to me. Every time I was trying to read a fairy tale or something, a common fairy tale, which had been read to me when I was a child, she would stop me and say, "What's wrong with him? Why is he hurting the animal?" Right? So it's so foundational to our stories. The violence is in there, So we kind of condition our children to become violent as they grow up and to see violence as normal. And so even our epics, like the epics of Hinduism, right? Ramayana and Mahabharata. So I was reading her the Ramayana too when she was 4 years old. And in the Ramayana, the first story is the king going into the forest, and he's trying to shoot a deer, and he accidentally shoots a human being instead. Okay, so that's how the story starts. And so her question was, why is he even thinking of shooting a deer? What's wrong with him? That deer was
Right.
just drinking water from the river,
Mhm.
right? And then she told me, why are you reading me stories like this? I don't want to hear it anymore. So that was the end of Ramayana for me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I realized that this was a story that was read to me as a child, and I didn't even think about it. So a constitution is one where we agree that we will not do this to our children anymore, that we will have a system of normal non-violence in which the stories we tell our children, everything has to be based on our role as the caretaker, the caregiver species of the planet, not as the dominating species that can go and kill anything we want, right? Because we have all these tools and weapons to do that. So, is what are we using the weapons? I mean, the tools for? Is it for helping nature and being kind to animals, or are we using it to oppress them and dominate over them? So that's, I think, a foundational shift that has to happen in the new world. See, if we don't do that, if you're trying to fix it in the current system, in the current game, a dead animal is worth more than a live animal.
Mhm.
A caged bird is worth more than a bird that's free. So then why are we surprised that all birds eventually get caged and eventually get killed? Right? Because that's what values is valued more in your game. So that's the game you have agreed to play. And so you're going to get the results. You agreed to play this game, right? So you got to change the game, literally, right? So you can see that you have to change the game. And so it's like, what is the new currency, the new game that we have to play, right? And what are all the vegan institutions that we need to create, and the infrastructure that we need to create, where we can supply good food to people, nutritious food to people. Because to me, all of these are engineering projects. Okay, I mean, if you look at our civilization as an engineering project that tried to implement the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, we have done an abysmal job. Okay, because I mean, it's the worst engineering job you can imagine, right? Because you started out by saying all people are created equal, and everyone is entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's our foundation. Then we said you all have to earn a living. Well, wait a minute, I thought I had an inalienable right to life, so why do I have to earn a living? That
Yeah.
is colonialism, right? Earning a living
Right.
is a colonial term. It's basically saying if you don't serve the master, you're not entitled to live. I mean, see how brazen it is? You said you had an inalienable right to life, and then you're telling me you have to earn a living.
Yeah.
So it's just the
It's
opposite.
when you get into vegan currency, do you mean that philosophically or literally? Because there is a point in the new game where you talk about the $101 from individuals going into
Right.
vegan companies, and I'm not sure if that's how you're interpreting the vegan currency or if there's also a philosophical tenor to it.
No, it's completely philosophical. I mean, that's just the $101. Actually, we are even abandoning that. We really don't need to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Basically, what we are saying is we have to live within the bounds of the planet. Okay, there are planetary boundaries that we can determine as to how much CO2 we can emit and how much phosphorus and nitrogen we can emit, how much land we can use, how much fresh water can we take. So there are all these planetary boundaries that scientists have determined, right? And then we also have these basic needs that everyone has to meet. We have to meet everyone's basic needs. So this is the donut economics that Kate Raworth talks about, right?
Mhm.
Where you're within the donut as opposed to in the whole of the donut or outside the donut. Okay, so it's a how would you implement donut economics? That is actually engineering. Okay, because you have to say for every action that you take, you have to measure what is the impact on the planetary boundaries, and are you still within it when everyone takes this action? So we have to measure the impact of every product that we create. They measure the impact in terms of the planetary boundaries. And then we have to make sure that everyone gets at least a minimum basic income so that they can stay outside the hole of the donut,
Yep.
right? So it's a combination of the two. So it's how do you do true cost accounting of all the planetary boundaries? So it really has to be a multidimensional cost. And how do you make sure that everyone gets a universal basic income in terms of these costs, the allowances for these costs? So that to me is a straight out engineering problem, and can be easily solved. Can be solved. Okay, it's not easily solved. It can be solved. And so I see this as, imagine that we all see ourselves as cosmonauts on spaceship Earth, right? How would you design the cosmonauts experience on spaceship Earth? Now imagine if you're a cosmonaut on a vehicle that's going to Mars. How would you arrange you know your responsibilities, and how, what you do to the fellow passengers and so on, right? you wouldn't you wouldn't say one passenger is the boss and he's going to have to, he's going to make the other guys do all the slave work. If you did that, that ship is not going to go to Mars.
Right. Yeah.
There'll be rebellion. I mean, it's one of the worst engineering jobs ever, that what we have done on spaceship Earth. Okay, if you look at it from that perspective. And I said, of course we know how to do it better than that. Of course we know how to design a better game. So it's about designing a game in which life is valued, not death, right? And in which you are encouraged to be compassionate. You're encouraged to actually regenerate. So you have to have a game in which you lead your ordinary lives by playing the game and following the rules of the game, and the planet will thrive as a result of that, right? So if we don't have a game like that, then you have a game that's going to kill you. That's exactly what our current game is doing. See, you look, because I thought about, why is it that Pamela belongs in this sanctuary and all the other people don't belong? She had to patrol the land and make sure that no human being comes inside. Well, she was inside. Why does she belong? Well, she has enough money in the bank. She doesn't have to worry about food, right?
Mm-hmm.
All the others, they see an elephant walking by, they see $1,000 bill walking by, because that's how much rich people are willing to pay for the ivory tusks that the elephant has. So you start out by telling people you have no money, okay, unless you do what the rich people want. That's the game we are playing. And then we complain, oh my God, the game is killing us all off. So what do you expect? Because that's the game you're playing. So unless we, create a game in which people lead their ordinary lives and they are taking care of the elephant as part of their ordinary lives, we are going to fail, right?
Yeah, and I think that the information presented thus far, kind of going back into the Al Gore, presentation of simply omitting, what animal agriculture and has kind of done in those facts and figures, pulling it into. I think that there's a lot of naivete or lack of information. And on your website, you guys, I can quote it really quickly. It says the Green New Deal and the Paris Climate Accord score 0 out of 7 on the core shifts because they do nothing about the global game of how money is created and earned within our industrial civilization. This game, which coordinates all our economic activities, is the root cause of the normalized violence in our system, and it needs to be changed or rather transformed. And you can achieve that by the new game called Aquarius. And I'm curious, is part of the first step into the new game? I want to know about the transformation of going into the new game from the old game. Is it the realization of the true facts and figures, or is it just deciding that one is going to move forward and make a change?
It's actually the fundamental realization that the current game values death more than life.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Once we realize that, we all say, why do we want to play this game? Anyone I speak to. So because it's literally values death more than life. And so you have to play a game in which you value life more than death, right? Otherwise, I mean, because human beings, we coordinate our actions among millions and billions of us by telling a common story and playing a common game. So the common story we're telling is literally the story of colonialism and how it's so normal, right? We are broken up into countries and we have our own currencies. This is a story we're telling about ourselves. There is no such thing as a border in nature. You know, the animals don't have borders, they just walk across. Right?
Right.
We have to put walls to prevent them from doing that. Right? So we tell all these stories of division among human beings, division based on national origin, based on color of skin and gender and all kinds of divisions we create among ourselves. And then we play a game in which we play divisions against each other and and compete. So you look at all of our games, the most popular games are all competitive games, right? I mean, you see a tennis player and you say, wow, this guy is the world champion in whatever. I mean, he's, okay, he may be good, but there are others just as good as him. Yeah. So one of the first things my granddaughter taught me is that she hated competition. She hated it. She just didn't want to, play the game so well that you're the winner, right? I mean, someone's a winner. So we were playing hide and seek when she was 3 years old. And one day, her dad hid so well she couldn't find him. And then she said, I don't like this game. She told me, I don't like this game anymore. And she said, from now on, I'm going to tell you where to hide.
Yeah.
So that's what
Good.
she was doing from that point on. She would tell me, Grandpa, go hide in that closet. And then she would look for me in other places because it was for her, it was the act of playing that was the fun. It was not the finding. It was not the winning in the competition, right?
Mhm.
It was just the act of playing with each other. That's what she liked the most. So I realized that that's the game. Those are the kinds of games we play. The most popular games are games in which one side eventually wins and everybody else is unhappy. Right? So there's
Yeah.
one person who's happy and everyone else is unhappy. So,
Yeah.
uh, so we really don't have to do that anymore. You know?
Yeah, no, and I want to talk about the old game versus the new to clarify because you talk about death and fear being the main proponents of the old game and that
Hmm.
sustaining, classism and everything that kind of trickles down from that. And so the new game needs to be, conversely based out of compassion and this
Right.
giving. Um, and you also talk about the gift economy versus the transaction economy in relationship
Mhm.
to the old versus the new, and how the new game isn't necessarily going to be completely related on the gift economy. And you use the mother and child paradigm. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah. The in the old game, it is completely transactional, right? So you work for someone and that person is going to give you money if you do the certain things that he or she wants you to do. So that's how money is earned in the old game, right? And that then allows you to go tap into the resources of other people, because ultimately, what is money? Money is just a transaction between us saying, okay, for this, I will devote my time and resources. Okay, my time and my energy and my know-how, I'll devote it to this task, provided I get this in return, right? And so I exchange that for other people's time and money. I mean, time and resources, and their intellectual know-how, right? So I'm able to now tap into the intellectual know-how and resource and time of several human beings, through remote control, literally, with this money, right? Because if I had to grow the rice and bring it to my home and cook it myself, I
Yeah.
don't think I'd be able to do that, right? So we depend upon other people to help us, right? And um, so then you ask, what kind of economy are we going to create in which people are still doing things for the benefit of others, but they're not doing it for the benefit of others because they have to. They do it because they want to. Okay, can we create an environment like that? And so that is the love-based economy I'm talking about. Because currently we have a fear-based economy. The fear is that if you don't do this, you're going to starve to death. Because
Right.
that's the that's the foundational fear, right? You're going to
Yeah.
starve to death. And so that's the colonizers have just drilled it into our heads. I mean, I'm not saying colonizers in the sense of, English or American. I'm saying we are all colonized. Okay, we are all buying into this game, and we've all bought into it, right? So you see that we've all been colonized. So it is the new game, the game that's based on love, is a game in which you start out by telling people you belong. You belong in the community. The community is going to assure a certain minimum standard of living for you. How is the community going to do that? Through members of the community. Okay. So the members of the community are going to help create these foundational needs, meet the foundational needs of their neighbors, of everyone, right? So those are some of the things that you can volunteer in.
Hmm.
And then the rest, you volunteer to do things for the good of the whole. You choose what you want to do. And then you can say, I see this river is dirty, that needs to be cleaned. So you start entering these things that need to be done, right? And people will come and say, oh, I can help you with that. So you created a transaction. It's not a transaction anymore. It's basically a gift economy that you're creating, in which everyone is offering their gifts. And why would they do that? Because they know that they belong in the community.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
you
you
then
have a
have to
lot of.
organize your. Sorry?
Oh, no, no. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we then have to organize ourselves differently. It cannot be based on national boundaries and things like that. It should be based on ecosystem boundaries, ecosystems and watersheds. And so you have to organize ourselves on the basis of the world we live in, the earth that we are part of, okay, and how we contribute to the others in that.
You also talk about choice, and I'm wondering if you believe that you talk about how it's crucial for choice to be part of the switch over to the new game,
Right.
because it's part about being ecologically responsible and based on the honesty system, and and downloading the app and things like that, and really staying accountable to oneself. Do you believe that this choice will become given if people feel like you're talking about that they belong, that we begin with this foundation that you belong here, and therefore people will begin to make the choice, or will people make the choice and then therefore cause other people to feel like they belong? Which one is coming first, or does it matter?
We are trying to design the new game, the Aquarius game, in such a way that you can play that game along with the old game.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think
So
you'd
you can
have
play
to.
both games. Yeah, you have to do that. And so we can play both games simultaneously. And this way you test it out and you iron out all the kinks, in the new game. Uh, but it requires a lot of infrastructure to be built for the new game, because we have to create a database that has, you know, um, cost accounting of all the products you're buying and stuff like that. So this is part of the work that we are trying to do now. And
Hmm.
once you do that, and then people start buying, playing both games, they automatically modulate their behavior. Okay,
Yeah.
because just like vegans, we automatically, once we find out that hurting animals is a bad thing, that we have been doing it mindlessly for so long, and we snap out of it and we start living a vegan lifestyle, eventually everyone has to cater to us. Right?
Right.
Wendy's has to have a vegan option. If they don't,
Right.
they are going to go out of business. It's not because they
Hmm.
want to promote veganism. Okay, they're going to go out of business because there are enough of us now who are making we are making a difference. In the same way, as more and more people play Aquarius or the new game, we will make a difference in all these corporations. They will have to cater to us. So they will have to transform themselves. So I see this as a process that happens. I mean, again, it's out of choice, right? And we are doing this, and eventually we're saying, look, the old game is disintegrating in front of your eyes. How many more fires do you want in California before you wake up? You know, so we need to play a different game in which we are regenerating the ecosystem that was there. We need to be making sure that we are protecting that. That should be a primary goal, not figuring out what the next app is that's going to make $1 billion. Yeah, that's what
Right.
our best minds are now trying to do, right?
Right. Yeah.
How do you
Well,
get
and
more eyeballs and things like that?
and you guys talk on the site, on your website, you talk about it's pretty hefty. You talk about the transitions that you envision in playing the new game and the advent of a new game society, and it goes from everything from like ecological principles of climate destruction to climate healing,
Mhm.
ecological overshoot to ecological thrivability, artificial scarcity to natural abundance. All of these things are in stark contrast. It's 180 degrees opposite
Right.
from the latter mentioned. Social principles, colonialism into decolonization, sexism and heterosexism into gender equality and justice. You have these, two
Right.
kind of polar opposites. However, if you follow it through, it would necessarily could possibly end in that final point that you're talking about, with the switch on of the new game. And so I think it's daunting just to see those lists, and and you talk about anyone who would like to contribute to them or change or alter them. It's interesting to kind of sit back, even in, you talk about spiritual principles and animal slavery, animal liberation, deliberate cruelty, and then the opposite of compassion for all life, those kinds of things getting switched on. And I'm curious, how often do you do that exercise? Like as you begin to think about the new game Aquarius, is it a constantly evolving? You just mentioned that the $101 from individuals, as opposed to the 101 corporations at 10 million each. Individuals giving $101 and then quarterly distributing those into vegan companies. This was one of your solutions. You're saying that that's kind of changed now. How much is the process evolving on a yearly basis as you start to kind of really see where Aquarius can take us?
Yeah, it is. It's all being discussed right now. It's all in the mix, as
Uh huh.
to how exactly we implement this new game. We have chosen a platform that we want to implement it in, and it's called Holochain. And so we have, because it's a very distributed platform, it's hard for people to um, game that, you know, because if it's a centralized database, it's hard. It's easier for people to game it. And so these are all the things that we are thinking about now, setting it up in a way that makes it robust to start with. But
Yeah.
yeah, everything is in play. I mean, I wrote those things out, the principles and where we are now and where we need to go, just to show people how absurd our current system is, how totally contrary to who we really are, right? And why are we still playing this game, right? So when you put it down, you begin to see what the heck have we been doing all along, and so it gives us the impetus to go and write the new game. And to me, we are the last generation that can do this. Okay. Gandhi tried to do it 100 years ago. Martin Luther King tried to do it 50, 60 years ago. And and I think they both, they had the right intentions, but they really didn't have the right tools. Today we have the tools. Okay, we have the tools, and we have in the necessity. It's like staring at us in the face. You don't do this, you're gonna die. It's that stark, right? Is that stark? And it's not just you're going to die, your children are going to die, your grandchildren. I mean, it's going to be a total annihilation if we don't take care of this. So climate change is nothing to sneeze at. It's not a it's just nature figuring itself out. Nature will figure itself out for sure. I know that. But nature's timescales are not our timescales.
Right.
Nature may take a million years to sort this out if we continue doing the destruction. And then we won't be part of nature at that time. Maybe the
Yeah.
rats will take over. The rats will have their own technology. I don't know.
Yeah.
Right?
Rats and cockroaches. Definitely. The Vegan World 2026 2019 convention was interesting. When you were doing press for that and you were talking about it, you talked a lot about systems and um, getting people most useful to the system, people who wanted to join this 2026 effort. Making sure that people were compartmentalized for the greatest efficacy of the system. And I'm wondering how that has played out. Is that part of the new game as well, making everyone's best effort who wants to work towards this best applied in the most practical and best way? Or is that separate and just something that the conference was set, I believe, to, and I didn't attend, but from what I heard, it was set to kind of have these breakout sessions, these breakout
Right.
groups, and not just be in these assigned huge conferences or things like that. It was meant to kind of have this greater efficacy based on these breakout groups. Can you kind of explain more about that and what came of it?
Yeah, see, there are so many aspects of this that new story and the new game that we need to address that people will feel. I mean, it was basically all volunteer effort. So we told people, you can form your own breakout groups on different topics, and and go and talk among yourselves and figure out what is your recommendation for how do we move forward, right? So it's about making progress and giving people a format and a venue where we feel like we are contributing something towards making progress on the definition of the new game, the new story. And so it last year we had a physical conference in Arizona where people got together, and this year we are planning a virtual conference. So that will also be at the end of October. And I'm just working out all the details for the virtual conference. And again, we are planning to have like different Zoom rooms that people can go and they can choose what they want to go and work on, which Zoom room they want to go to. And they can switch if they want to. And they can also propose, I want a breakout room for this topic or that topic. So we are trying to create a venue where people can come and act out and contribute to the progress of this. And um, I mean, once we do this virtual one, I want to now have it once every 4 months, or once every 3 months, not just once every year, especially because online we can meet quicker. And then in between the conferences, we can actually do the work that needs to be done for the next
Yeah.
conference and so on. So this is exactly how we did the internet. So I'm just basing it on my experience, how we
Yeah.
made progress on the internet.
Well, yeah, and we all know how quickly that worked out. So I'm curious, the online conference. Do you have dates? Do you have like a web address that if everyone's listening that is interested in getting onto it, they can go to, or should they just go to climatehealers.org or .com and
Yeah,
go from
it
there?
will be on the banner for climatehealers.org eventually. I mean, I'm just working out the registration forms and things like that right now,
Gotcha.
and the Trello cards so that we can organize it properly.
That's exciting. I can't wait to see that come to fruition. And yeah, the with the advent of the tragedy of the COVID-19 pandemic, I think has come up this this sped up being able to meet in Zoom, especially on platforms like this. That being able to do it more than once a year, I think it will increase the fluidity of the conversation, the viability of every idea. Being able to be tested every 3 months, like you're suggesting, is sounds paramount. I want to switch really quickly. We're running out of time, but I do want to switch to the white paper because this is something that I didn't really know about. I kind of bumped into. I have interviewed Jane Velez Mitchell, who I believe is an integral part of how this particular white paper came into being, but that's folklore until you confirm it for me. I want you to, if you would be so kind as to explain what the white paper is, and indeed if Jane Velez Mitchell and Jane Fonda's story, if that actually pans out to be accurate.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely accurate. Jane Wells Mitchell, called me one day, and she was very depressed, and she said, she told me about the incident that happened with Jane Fonda, and then she asked me point blank, she said, you focus on animal agriculture. Can you just write down why do you do that? Why are you focusing on animal agriculture? And why are all these others talking about fossil fuels? So can you write a white paper on it? And so that's how it started. I said, Jane, yeah, I think you're right. I should write it up, because I mean, I've been assuming it's all common knowledge, but it isn't. It's something that's sitting in my head. So I started writing down, if you actually do the calculations for the sensitivity, the global sensitivity, because as an engineer, I look at global sensitivity. So I assume, imagine, if you want to know what the impact of one particular sector is, you have to assume that that sector disappears and then see what the impact is if that sector disappears. So if I wave a magic wand and remove the fossil fuel sector entirely, right,
Hmm.
what happens at the end of the year? Is the earth going to be hotter or colder? It turns out that the earth will be hotter because the fossil fuel sector is contributing the most cooling of the earth. So it contributes all the aerosols, the sulfur dioxide, and that is literally cooling the earth by about 1 watt per square meter. So it turns out that if you remove the fossil fuel sector, by the end of the year, the earth will heat up by zero 0.9 watts per square meter. Okay?
Hmm.
The other, so it'll decrease the CO2 you're emitting, but it will also decrease the SO2 you're emitting, and therefore it will warm up the earth. And but if we did the same thing with the animal agriculture sector, if you just removed that and replaced it with vegan food, tomorrow, then you will literally cool the earth by zero 0.1 watt per square meter by the end of the year. Because you will have so much land being released back to nature on which you can bring back the forest. So if you take all that into account, it literally cools the earth by 0 0.1 watt. So which means that the first thing you need to do if you want to shut down both industries, and we need to shut down both industries, there's no question in my mind that even the fossil fuel sector has to be shut down. But it's important how you shut it down.
Hmm.
So you have to first shut down the killing machine of animal agriculture, and then you can shut down 10% of the burning machine every year for the next 10 years. That's the right way to shut down these machines. Okay, as an
Well,
engineer, that's what I'm trying to do.
and it's tragic. I mean, the inverse for anyone who's trying to help, that isn't vegan is being done. And so people are immediately attacking the fossil fuels, and saying, we'll
Right,
look at the animal agricultural aspect after this is done. And so it's
right,
tragic that those even trying to do good are doing it in the exact countermeasure that they ought to be doing it in.
right.
You talk about the importance of land use because of this, and kind of and looking at it, and the growth back. Um, Specifically, the number 37% of land use is for animal agriculture. Can you kind of break down a little bit, so in layperson's terms, how that kind of plays out if it was recaptured or part of it regained back into use for growth versus food production? A lot of people immediately think that it would be needed for put back into vegetable food production source, and you've said that that's not true.
Right. Because right now we are actually extracting 6 times as much food as we really need as human
Right.
beings. So it is it's such an inefficient system, the food system. It would be, you blow your mind when you look at the numbers. And it blew
Yeah.
my mind looking at the numbers in the IPCC. So we eat about 1.5 billion tons of food a year, and we are actually extracting 9 billion tons of food from nature. And then we take 7.3 billion tons of that food and give it to our animals.
Hmm.
And they give us 0.19 billion tons of food. So it's almost a 40 to 1 reduction that happens going through the animal. And this includes all food put together, dairy, eggs, meat, all put together, right? But they also provide 0.14 billion tons of other substances like skin and bones that's being used in our industrial processes. This is why animal agriculture is the foundation of the current system.
Yeah.
Because if we take the animals out, a lot of those things have to be reimagined and rethought. And we vegans are forcing them to do it by saying,
Mhm.
I won't buy a product if it has any animal glue in it. Forget the animal, right? I mean, if there's animal glue in it, we don't want to buy that, right? By making that, we are forcing them to reimagine everything. Okay. And so literally we are veganizing the whole infrastructure. But that 9 billion tons of food we are extracting, can we not feed ourselves with just that? Of course we can. In fact, half of the crops we grow, we feed our animals.
Yeah.
And not only
Right.
that, there's so much crops that we just store in warehouses and we just dump it when it grots. And simultaneously, lots of people are going hungry, in our neighborhoods.
Mhm.
Why do we
Yeah.
do that? Because the foundation of the industrial system is that there has to be hunger. If there are no hungry people, some of the crummy jobs won't get done.
Right.
Like who's going to work in a slaughterhouse if you have plenty to eat? Who's going to go do those crummy jobs that no one wants to do, right?
Right.
So because we have these crummy jobs, we have made hunger as part of our system. There has to be so many hungry people. This is why, even the economists who design the economy, they insist on a certain amount of unemployment.
Right. Yeah.
They don't go to zero unemployment. They have to have some amount of unemployment because otherwise, who's going to work in the slaughterhouse, right?
Mhm. You talk in the report, you also talk about the white paper gets into this is an area I have not heard ever elaborated on. And so if I've read it, it's kind of glossed right over me. You differentiate between entire CO2 levels versus airborne. And I'm hoping you
Yeah,
can unpack this because I think it's such a crucial factor that I haven't heard anybody talking about.
right. Yeah, so when we pour CO2 into the atmosphere, only 45% stays up in the atmosphere by the end of the year. Okay. So if you look at how much CO2 we have put into the atmosphere and compare it with how much CO2 increased in the atmosphere, you will see only 45% is up there. What happened to the other 55%? Now, what the IPCC is claiming in their models is that 55% is part of the CO2 we put into the atmosphere previously in the last 100 years or so. So it's slowly coming down, okay, and that's why it went down by 55%. And Jim Hansen has written a paper showing that that is not true.
Mhm.
What he's written is that if you look at the airborne fraction and you look at the rate of CO2 that we have added to the atmosphere, in starting in the 2000 decade, we increased the rate of CO2 into the atmosphere, but the airborne fraction started going down. Now, if the airborne fraction was caused entirely by past CO2 emissions, the airborne fraction should have gone up, not down, starting in the year 2000. So it proves that not all of it is from the past. There is something going on in the immediate CO2 cycle that is absorbing some of the CO2 we put into the atmosphere. And it's still not well understood.
Hmm.
Okay. And it's still not examined in detail. Even though they know, Hansen wrote this paper like 10, 15 years ago. They know that not all of the airborne fraction is caused by past emissions. They haven't really gotten to the bottom of it. And I am asking in the white paper, what's holding you back?
Mhm.
Study it. Because as an engineer, I want to know what is really going on with the CO2. If you want me as an engineer to help you manage the CO2 in the atmosphere, I have to know the processes. See, the CO2 that we are putting into the atmosphere is part of a much larger CO2 cycle that's even 20 times bigger, right? Because it's part of respiration, part of photosynthesis. That's all CO2 cycles. And those cycles are 20 times bigger than what we are putting into the atmosphere. So if those cycles are adjusting themselves to compensate for some of the CO2 we are putting into the atmosphere, we need to understand that. So that's the point that I'm trying to raise in the airborne fraction section. I'm
Yeah.
asking the scientists, the climate scientists, what's holding you back from addressing it? Is it because you're trying to push up the impact of fossil fuels and reduce the impact of animal agriculture? Is there a
That's
game going on there, right? Yeah.
yeah, and that's absolutely my guess. It seems logically inferred that that's what's happening. I like the idea of the white paper because it arms those who are still kind of, sorting through, even with all of the powerful things you've been involved with yourself with Cowspiracy and all of these great documentaries. It can still feel a little daunting, taking on
Right.
some of the counterfacts that are just, arbitrary lies, made up by you would think at this point we understand that cow milk isn't good for the human body, and you still have doctors recommending it to pregnant women. I
Right.
mean, it's the most arbitrary thing. And so I think to have a white paper, I agree with Jane Velez Mitchell. I think it's so important. And I don't know exactly what Jane Fonda was thinking and saying, to stop kind of bringing up the animal agriculture as it relates to climate change, but I suspect she's a clever enough woman to recant that sooner rather than later. But the utility of the white paper, I think, is imperative for anyone who's looking at trying to get involved and stay on the up and up of figures and key points that have been molested by even some of the agricultural communities that are looking to do good. Salish, we are out of time, and I'm saddened by that because I had a million other aspects to cover with you. But I want to end by telling you I look forward to playing the new game, Aquarius, and I look forward to going to climate healers and getting involved in the upcoming Zoom conference. I think it's going to be one for the ages because it's the first online one that you've done. So I'm excited for both of those, and I want to say thank you so much for coming on and giving us your expertise today.
Thank you, Patricia, for having me.
Absolutely. For everyone listening, you can find out more about Dr. Sailesh Rao on his website, www.climatehealers.org. And thank you for giving us your time today. From all of us at Patricia Kathleen Podcast, thanks for listening. Remember to be responsible, practice compassion, and always bet on yourself. Slancha.